Hello everybody, this is the Learn to Weave tutorial for the Rose and Wine wall hanging. So if you've got the box with this sticker, which is this wall hanging, this is the tutorial for you. Okay, so let's have a look at what we get in the box before we actually start weaving. So there's a couple of items that you get in here which are actually not part of the tutorial, but one of them is great to play with, another one's just a staple that you need in your weaving arsenal. So the first one is a warp thread, and the warp thread is what we thread the loom with. So you just got a roll of warp thread that you can use for future weaving projects. The other thing that I've popped in for you to play with is roving. So you may have this kind of roving or another kind. This is an alpaca and merino one, or you may just have a straight merino one. I'm just going to chuck in whatever as a little bonus for you to play with, but these two elements are not part of this weaving tutorial for this little baby that we're making today, so I'm just going to set those aside. Okay, so the things that you will find in here that we will be using today, first of all, just a booklet which gives you a little kind of step-by-step reference guide on how to make a wall hanging, and this is just kind of like a little memory prompter once you have kind of done this tutorial and then you want to get into weaving your own wall hangings. Postcard, just a bit of marketing collateral. These are your yarns. So there's this mohair one, a couple of lovely yarns from an Australian company called Morris and Sons. So we've got two baby alpacas, the two baby alpacas, which are my favourite. They're so soft and delicious. This one I'm calling the wine. This will be the brown, and this will be the cotton when I'm referring to the yarns throughout the tutorial. And this nice pink, pale pink, which will be a little pinky feature or highlight or whatever through our wall hanging. So they're the luscious materials we'll be using. Then the tools. So we will have our bamboo loom. This is the small size loom that I provide in this kit, and that's a loom that you can use over and over again. We've got the heddle. The heddle helps all of the warp threads stand up and away from the loom after we thread the loom. We've got our chunky tapestry needle. I'll show you how to use that as we move along, and the double-sided weaving comb, and we use this to push our work down as we start building our weaving from the bottom upwards. We also in the kit get this stick, and this is the stick that we'll be tying to the top of our work once we remove it from the loom, and it's just a nice way to hang and finish your work. So they are all the bits and pieces that you will get. You do need to grab two things for yourself. So you will need some scissors, and then you will need something like a postcard, which you can use this one. It can be a bit floppy, or even a book. You just need something that we're going to use to wrap yarn around for this tutorial. So go away and grab something that's about maybe sort of 15 centimeters long approximately. It can be a bit longer, a bit shorter, but essentially the length of it will dictate to you the length of the fringe. So my fringe, if you have a look in comparison to a postcard, is slightly longer. So if you want the fringe to be slightly longer than the length of a postcard, then try and find something that suits that. So this is the length of the book in relation to the postcard, so that would be the length of the fringe, or this way would be slightly shorter. So that just gives you an idea of what you need to go away and find to in order to dispense the yarns for the fringe. So once you have those two additional elements, come back and we will begin. Totes exciting. All right, let's get started. So the very first step that we take with any wall hanging is to create essentially the canvas that we're going to weave across, and we will use a loom to do that with. So we're going to be threading this loom, and I'll show you my way of threading a loom and talk about the reasons that I do that. Once we take it off the loom, it gives you basically an option of having this fan at the top of your work, which I find from a compositional point of view balances out the fringe nicely when you're making a small work, but you don't have to have the fan if you don't want to. Okay, so the first thing that I'll get you to do is to grab the cotton. So remember in the kit there's these two similar-ish colours. So one is the baby alpaca, which I'm going to be referring to as the brown. It's more kind of a grey brown, but I'm calling it brown. And this one I'm referring to as the cotton. So we're going to be warping our loom with the cotton. So I'll get you to pull the cuff off, find the end of your cotton. Also, just as a little FYI, obviously you will probably know this anyway, but if you need to pause at any time during the video to catch up with me, or to rewind and check how I did something again, that's the way this tutorial has been designed. So I will go as kind of slowly as possible from an instructional point of view, but you might just want to pause the video at some point. Okay, so I've got my cotton, I've got the end of it. Now I'm picking up my loom and I'm resting the beginning of that continuous piece of yarn through the first notch at the top. It doesn't matter what side, and it doesn't matter if it's left or right hand side. But what we're essentially going to be doing is wrapping that yarn all the way around and making sure we're getting all of these notches as we go. Because we want to create some tension as we do that, I'm holding this beginning part here with my fingers. So I'm holding it quite tight. Then I've got this continuous piece of yarn here, which I'm then, and in fact I'll just kind of awkwardly hold it like this so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm holding it with my thumb at the back and I'm just kind of pulling it down so there's a bit of tension there. Then we're essentially going to be going all the way around. So I'm just pulling it back into this position. So I've got my first bit. Now I'm going to the next notch across, and so on and so forth. So I'm just making sure I'm capturing each of the notches. What you'll find is at the front of the loom, the warp threads will be straight, and at the back of the loom they'll be slightly crooked because they're sort of reaching up to go over to the next one. So this is the back, so you can see it kind of reaches up to go over to the next notch, and this is the front. And because I held on to that first loose bit when I began, I've got a decent tension so that when I strum these warp threads like a guitar, they snap back into place. So we want to trim another long bit at the back. So you can see this is the bit I began with and this is the bit I'm finishing with. And I'm just going to tie those in a double knot at the center of the back of the loom. Like so. So if that's a bit long, I might just trim that just so it's not in my way. So this is the front. So I'm strumming all of these and they're snapping back into their positions. They're not so loose that they're kind of just crisscrossing over each other. And this is the back where the threads are crooked and we've tied the beginning and the end diagonally across the back of the loom. So I hope that all makes sense to you. Okay, the next step is to place the heddle behind those warp threads, and this is the heddle that I've designed to keep all of those warp threads in place and to add a bit of extra tension to our work, as well as lifting them away from the loom so that we can easily weave and kind of access around our warp threads. So there's two ways that you can do this. You can pick up each little individual warp thread and slip it behind, or these bamboo looms have got a little bit of give in them, so I just kind of give it a little bit of a bend, and I just slip the heddle behind all of the warp threads. I'm moving it up to the top of the loom, about that far from the top, and then I'm going to grab each end and flip it so that it's standing up. So you can see I've got all of those warp threads now standing away from the loom, nice and tight, and ready for us to begin weaving. So the first weaving that we do is the header, and the header is basically a few lines of weaving at the bottom of our loom, which is essentially like a concrete foundation that everything sits on. So our fringe is kind of going to sit on top of these few rows as it hangs down, and then we're going to be building everything on top of that as we go along. We're going to do 3 rows of our header at the bottom, and we're going to use the same yarn that we used to warp our loom with, which is the cotton. Just rest that there. So whereas we used a continuous ball of cotton when we were threading our loom, what we're going to do from now on is pre-dispense the amount that we need. So I'm going to pre-measure 3 rows because I know that's what I'm doing for the header. So I'm just going to go 1, 2, 3, and I've done it very approximately. I'm even going to give myself just a little bit extra so I don't leave myself short. This is not an exact science. It's just essentially pre-dispensing the approximately correct amount of yarn that we'll need to do those first 3 rows. So once we've dispensed the yarn, we're going to use our chunky tapestry needle, and I'm just going to use this large hole to thread that piece of cotton. And I haven't doubled it over or anything. You can see that, I'm just going backwards here. You can see I've just got it, God, Sky, get it right. Okay, can you see now? So I've just got a little sort of tail hanging, and we're going to be weaving a single thread across the bottom. So just pause if you need to catch up with me. So now we're going to start weaving. So I always start, out of habit more than anything, underneath the first warp thread, like so. And I'm using that angled part of the needle to help kind of scoop under the warp thread, and I'm also weaving a little bit further up the loom as opposed to right down the bottom here, because as you can see it's quite tight. So yeah, we are creating 3 rows down the bottom, but we're not able to actually get them down there yet. So we need to weave them up here and then push each row down as we go. I'll show you what I mean. All right, so I'm starting under the first, going under the next, over the next, under the third, etc., etc. So I'm basically going over and under each alternate warp thread, and you can see that I'm not forcing this needle to go all the way through. I'm just doing a few, pulling it through, doing a couple more, pulling it through, a couple more, and so on and so forth. So I find that's easier than trying to force the needle through the whole way. Then I'm pulling through until I've got a little tail hanging out the edge. Now I really want to emphasize with this tail, this is only long enough so that we've got enough to tuck back into the warp threads. We don't want it to be so long that it essentially becomes a whole nother row unto itself. So that is something to keep in mind. So this is maybe like 1.5 inches or 1 inch, 2 centimeters thereabouts. And you can see I haven't pushed it down to the bottom yet, so don't be tempted to kind of yank it and shove it down. What we actually want to do is just gently pull down on each side so that we have this natural arch happening. This arch is a really important indicator of tension across the loom. There is a real tendency, particularly for newcomers to weaving, to really pull quite dramatically tight with their work. So you can get what is called draw in, so draw in at the sides, and also draw in that sort of happens across your work. We want to have some nice straight edges on our work, and unless we're doing a very kind of uber free-form creative piece, but just learning the basics here and mastering one of the more challenging aspects of weaving, which is tension. If we adhere to this methodology or technique where we just gently pull our yarn down and then use that arch to push all the way to the bottom. So it may seem a little loose, but don't be perturbed by that. It's meant to be loose, but not floppy. Getting back to the little tail, always get into the habit of tucking this in once we've completed a row. Don't worry about what's happening with all of this at the moment. Go back to the beginning, and then we're just going to tuck that back in the opposite direction. And that's, I've left enough to go under 2 warp threads here, and you can see that just kind of neatly sits there, and that will sort of disappear into the rest of the work once we do our other rows. So that's probably ever so slightly loose, that middle bit, so I'm just easing it across, but I haven't pulled in any way, shape or form. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and do the next line, or the next row, and where my warp thread, my weft thread, this is the weft, is sitting over the top of that warp thread, I'm now going to go under. So I'm just repeating that under over pattern, but it's going in the opposite direction to the row below. And I'm just doing a few and pulling through, a few and pulling through. I'm weaving a little bit higher on the loom because it's a bit too tight down the bottom. And then I'm gently pulling so that we're just sitting around that end warp thread, pulling down on one side. So I've got that nice arch happening, and then once again using my comb to push it all the way down to the bottom. So you can see that little bit that we've tucked in has already kind of disappeared into the work. So as I mentioned before, we're doing a total of 3 rows. So once again, we're going to go back in the other direction with our cotton. So this cotton is sitting over the top of this warp thread. So once again, we're going under in the opposite pattern to the row below. Let's bring that through. Oops, lost it. Once again, we just want it to sit around the edge of that warp thread there. Just kind of gently ease it down. Maybe it can probably come in just a tiny bit more. And then I can just lift this up again and just sort of ease down and push down with my comb. So the comb, it's got a chunkier side and a finer side. It doesn't really matter what you use, which side you use, but you'll find in some, you know, as you go on to discover the wonderful world of weaving, there might be times if you weaving something particularly chunky that you would use this side or the finer side, but for the moment it doesn't really matter which side you use. Cool, and then we've done our first 3 rows. Now we do have this excess bit of yarn that we need to trim and tuck in as well, so we're going to trim so that we have, you know, about an inch or a couple of centimeters like we did for the beginning, and we're going to tuck that back in. However, and this is tricky for some, but if you just imagine that we're going to lift a corner and tuck this tail in between the 3rd row and the 2nd row, it should help you get there. But you can see I've just lifted up that corner, and now I'm going to tuck in between the top row and the row below. I'm just going to pull it back here so I can kind of see what I'm doing. So I've got my ridiculous nails to help me kind of grab that bit of yarn, but you can use your needle to kind of help you pop it into position if you need to. So you can see I've kind of popped it in there. It's probably not the neatest, but it doesn't really matter. The fringe is going to go over the top, and we're all set to move on to our next step, which is in fact the fringe. So this is where you grab your item that you're going to use to dispense your yarn to create the fringe with. And we're going to be doing 2 rows of fringe, so I'll show you in the completed wall hanging what I mean. So you can see down here a little bit longer than this row on top that I've got all cotton fringe. So if we turn to the back, the first row that we've created is using the cotton. So it's all cotton. And what I've done is I've dispensed 10 pieces for each little rye knot. And the rye knot is this knot that we use to create our little bundles, knotted bundles, to tie into the warp threads to create the fringe. So the first step is still using the cotton, grabbing whatever we've decided we're going to use. I actually use a small frame from a $2 shop, or I don't know what you call them elsewhere in the world, but you know, those shops that sell everything for cheap. This is a little artist canvas, and what I like about it is it's a nice wooden frame, but it's got this hole at the back which makes it easy to cut the yarn. So I'm going around the long side, and I just want to show you in comparison to the post. So here is the size of the postcard. So that is just a reference point for the size, the template that I'm using. So I've gone around 10 times, and I'm going to chop through these threads. So I'm just using this hole at the back to chop through, but if you're using something else, you just kind of, you know, get your scissors through there like so. And what we have now is this bundle of even length pieces of yarn that we're going to create our first rye knot with. The rye knot is spelt R-Y-A, and it's going to go just here. So, watching. So I'm folding the bundle in half, like so, and I'm resting that halfway point over the top of the first two warp threads. So I kind of isolate them with a finger, just kind of so I know what I'm working with. So I've got them popped over the top, the center of the bundle over the top. So I'll just do that again. So the center over the top. Then I'm pulling each side of that bundle through the middle of those two warp threads. So I'll just make sure that I get them all through. So I'm obviously doing this kind of upside down and back the front. You would be holding the loom in front of you, and it would be much easier to do than I'm making it look right now, because that little one won't go through. Okay, and then I'm just going to go through and grab the other side. Cool. I'll just make sure they're even-ish, and we can give them a trim at the end. And that's our first rye knot, and I've pulled it down quite firmly. I know I did rabbit on about tension and not pulling these edge warp threads in, but as you can see, there's not really any way around that with the rye knot, and it's all part of the weaving process, so I wouldn't be overly concerned about that, as long as from this point onwards we don't continue to kind of pull things in. All right, let's do another one just as a bit of a refresher. So we're grabbing that cotton, we're going 10 times around, we're chopping off whatever our template is, we're grabbing the center of the bundle. If you've got a bit that's a bit longer, we can just trim that. So I've got the center of the bundle. We're now going to the next two warp threads across. So placing over the middle. And in fact, I'm going to do a little twisty because these ones aren't really behaving themselves. Pulling the other side through. Okay, making sure they're even-ish, and once again we can do a bit of a trim at the end, and so on and so forth. So I will get you to complete the rest of the loom, and I shall do the same, and then let's reconvene once that's finished. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more to do. So let's have a look at how they go, and good luck. Okay, so we've completed our first row of fringe. Now, just as an FYI, I've actually used the sort of end of a ball for this demonstration of this cotton, which is why it's quite curly, but if you're using the beginning, it will be straighter. If you really like the look of a straighter fringe, you can get out like a hair straightener or even iron this. It's just cotton, so some people like things to look really kind of super controlled and neat, and that's a way you can achieve that if you so desire. All right, so let's have a look at our sample. So now we've done this bottom row, which is underneath all the fluffy bits. So we've done that bottom row, and now we're going to work on the next row, which gives us this nice sort of slightly mixed up palette, and we've got the wine, the light pink, and the brown, which is in the baby alpaca. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to do these 3 tassels. So it is the left hand side of your loom that we're doing those on, and I will be kind of working with these ones here, but if you're down here, you're kind of working on your left hand side. Hope that makes sense. Okay, so I'm using the same template that I used before, and I'm grabbing my brown in the baby alpaca, so just pull the cuff off, and I'm going to dispense 8 of these. I'm going around 8 times. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Chopping that off. So that's my first bundle. And as you may have observed already, the knot sits slightly in from the edge, and that's because we skip this first warp thread, and we're going to put the next Rya knot in between the two, and I'll show you what I mean. So once again, just getting the center of the bundle. You should be quite proficient at this by now. Skipping this first one and working with these 2 here. Place over the top, through the center, getting them all through. No baby packers were harmed during the harvesting of this yarn. Okay, so make sure they're even and pull down. So because the baby alpaca is a little bit bouncier, it's naturally a little bit shorter than the row below, but we will actually trim that at the end to make it to set it a little bit higher. Okay, so let's go ahead and do 2 more of those. So we get these 3 here. So I'll just do that with you, but if you need to, remembering it's a thickness of 8 for these, if you need to pause, please go ahead. So I'm just chopping my my second bundle of 8, and my third bundle of 8. I'm just going to do these. Probably should make it clear. So obviously we've done these 2 here, so now we go to the next 2 across. We're not skipping anything here. Do this one, so I'll do that like so. And then I'm just going to do these for the third one. Voila. I want you to make sure they're all pulled down quite tight as well, like so. Cool. So there we've got the 3. So maybe I might loosen that up a bit. Voila. Cool. Okay, so the next step after that is the wine. So it's exactly the same. We're going to do a thickness of 8, but we're using this nice deep dark red rose winey colour. So we'll remove the cuff from that lovely baby alpaca. We're going to do a thickness of 8. Voila. Just going to the next 2 across. And pull down, and there we can see the nice colour palette starting to form. All right, so this is a slightly different wry knot that we're going to be doing with the pink now. So the light pink, you can see, is looped and longer than the rest of the fringe. It's a little bit of a sort of a feature that we've got happening in the fringe here. So I want to show you how I do that. So we just do that with our hands. So I've got my pink here, slightly tangled, and I've located the end, and you may need to take a moment to do that as well with your little miniature skein. And if we observe, I'll show you with this one. So this one is probably about, I don't know, maybe 5 centimetres longer, maybe 2 inches longer than the rest of the fringe. So what we want to do is we want to measure the end here. So I'm going to say it's about that much longer, which means that is going to be the midpoint. So if I fold it over, you can see that'll be the midpoint, and it will all kind of hang down there. So I want to have my piece of yarn that long, which is about 40 to 45 centimetres if you really need to measure it. But I'm a freeform weaver. I quite like the fact that your hands and your brain will kind of make it a slightly different measurement, which will make it uniquely your work. Okay, so that's our single piece. We want to double this over, like so. So I've doubled it over, and now I'm going to trim that piece there. So we've essentially got one long piece that we've folded in half, and then I'm going to use that as my wire knot. So I'm going to the next 2 across, placing the center of that bundle over the top of the warp threads, each side through the middle. Then I'm evening up and pulling down. And there we've got, I'll just loosen that tiny bit just so you can see that bit there. Voila. And that's how we do that bit. That's a really nice technique when you start to design your own wall hangings. You can do a lot of kind of nice, really sort of loopy, relaxed boho fringes using that technique. And if you have a look at some of my work online, you'll see that I do that a fair bit. And back to our little baby, we'll see the last one is back to the brown baby alpaca, which is 8. So we'll just do do that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Chop through the middle. I'm going to do this way. Voila, voila. And there we have our completed fringe, which we can trim up later. And I will show you some funky alternatives as well with that. So exciting.